is about and some of the major changes that have been made. That said, I'm going to leave a link for the official 2.0 framework in the video description, so feel free to check that out also. So before we dive into the CSF version 2.0 framework, I wanted to give you an idea of what exactly is a security framework. So a security framework is a structured set of guidelines and best practices, standards, and controls. It's designed to help organizations manage and improve their overall security posture. It provides a systematic approach to addressing security risk, as well as it implements security controls to protect against threats and vulnerabilities, ensuring compliance with the relevant regulations and industry standard. Essentially, a security framework really helps you simplify that process of aligning your organization's cybersecurity profile against industry standards and compliances, right? In other words, it takes the guesswork out of it for you, right? Instead of you wondering what do you need to do, what controls do you need to implement, this provides you with a simplified way of doing that. So what is the NIST CSF framework? So this framework was developed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, and it's designed to help organizations manage and improve their cybersecurity posture. It's flexible and scalable for organizations of all sizes and sectors, as well as it's widely adopted as a valuable tool for managing cybersecurity risk. So the main takeaway I want you guys to get from this is that it's very flexible and it's easy to adopt, right? There are a lot of different frameworks out there, right? And all of them have their place, right? But a lot of them, they have a lot of overhead. It's pretty difficult in a sense to implement or to align to. The thing about the CSF framework is that it's relatively easy to adopt, and it can be adopted by any organization, right? Almost all organizations, no matter your size or your industry and stuff like that, right? NIST also has other frameworks as well, and if you're in the security industry, you probably hear about the NIST 800-53 framework, right? So some of the main differences between the CSF and the 800-53 is that the CSF framework or the cybersecurity framework, it comprises of 108 security controls, right? The 800-53, it comprises of 1077 controls, right? So the 800-53 has almost 10 times the amount of controls compared to the CSF framework. Also, the 800-53 was specifically created for federal systems, right? So this is U.S. federal systems, so any kind of U.S. agency, organization, they are mandated, by law. It's a requirement for them to use the 800-53 framework, right? Again, the CSF framework, that's not the case. This is basically just optional, and it can be used by any organization, right? You don't have to be a federal organization. It can be used by any organization. That said, I would say that the 800-53 is considered by many to be the gold standard in terms of cybersecurity, right? It's considered to be the gold standard, right? But as I said, it's a lot of overhead to be able to pull off, and a lot of organizations may not necessarily be able to do that, and that's where the CSF framework comes in. It's easier to adopt and implement and align to. So the version 1.1 framework, it comprised of 5 functions, they call it, right? Identify, protect, detect, response, and recover. These are the 5 functions that the previous CSF version 1.1 comprised of, right? So the identify function, it helps you to understand and manage cybersecurity risk. A protect function helps to implement safeguards for critical services and data protection. Detect, here we continuously monitor and detect cybersecurity events, Response allows us to develop and implement response activities to the incidents and recover. Here we discuss restoring capabilities and improving resilience after incidents, right? So these are the 5 functions of the 1.1 framework. And looking at or comparing to the version 2.0 framework, one of the major differentiators is that we now have a govern function, right? But the govern function, it kind of encompasses all of the other, the 5 functions, right? So the 5 functions from the previous framework is there, but the govern one, it kind of encompasses all of them. And here, here shows a little more details about the differences from the version 1.1 to the 2.0, right? So as mentioned, the previous one had 5 functions. Now we have 6 functions, right? That's the govern function. And if we look at the previous one, the risk management and the risk assessment and stuff, or the risk management, it's been moved over to govern, right? And even the governance one now, that's been removed from identify, and it's the own category, in other words, its own function, right? So for me personally, I think it makes sense, moving over some of these things and adding and removing, some of these things and making it, this whole separate function, right? This govern function. To me, it makes sense. Aside from functions, we have 23 categories in the previous ones. We have 22 here. These are the categories, as you can see here, under each function. Also, we had 108 subcategories in the previous version. Now we have 106, so 2 have been removed. Right, so just high-level bird's eye view, these are some of the main differences between the 2 frameworks. And as I said, I'm going to leave a link in the video description where you can reference them at your own leisure. So now we're going to kind of look at these things specifically. So starting off with the govern function, right? So for the govern function, we deal with organizational context, right? We discuss organizational context here. So what this does, basically the organization looks at itself, and we try to figure what are we trying to achieve from a cybersecurity point of view. And this would be unique to each organization, because whether your organization deals with BYOD devices, or probably you only have on-prem equipment, whether you deal with financial data, so each organization will be different. So, we need to really help us to try to figure out first, before we do anything else, what's the context? What are we trying to achieve here from a cybersecurity perspective? Also, we discuss risk here. We discuss what is the organization's tolerance to risk, or what is our risk appetite. So this means what risk are we able to absorb as an organization, or what risk are we able to mitigate, right? What controls can be put in place to mitigate these risks, or what risks we do not want to deal with. We want to transfer that to a third party. Right, so that is what all those things would come up here for discussion when we try to figure out what is our risk appetite. Also, here we define what are our rules, right, in cybersecurity. So we have CISO, we have our cybersecurity officers, we have who is the data owner, who are the data custodians, who are all these. We have a bunch of different rules, right? Who's in charge of response and detection and response, bunch of different things, right, that we need to discuss. So we need to really define in this governance function what are the rules and who is responsible for these different rules. And here also we have policy and procedure creation, and it kind of makes sense, right? Because since these things would govern, our organizations, our day-to-day runnings, it would make sense that we have policies and procedures that we create, we defined at the governance function. Next up, we have identify. So identify deals basically with the identification, of organization assets, right? So first off, we have asset identification. So we can protect what we don't know we have, right? Or what we know need protecting, in other words, right? So these assets could be in the form of data, right? It could be in the form of hardware like computers, switches, routers, servers, etc., or software. It could be software as well. It could be people. People is one of our greatest assets in any organizations. So yeah, we need to firstly identify what assets we need to protect, because we can't protect what we don't know we need to protect, right? So kind of makes sense. Also, this function we discuss risk analysis. So here we deal with attack surface management, right? So we really need to figure out what is our attack surface, right? So again, this would be unique to your organization. Someone that has on-premise equipment, all of your organization's assets and your data, everything is on-prem, right? Your attack surface will be different from an organization that is fully remote and people use BYOD devices, right? For instance. So really, you need to figure out and be able to have that attack surface management nailed down, because this is very critical as it's unique to your organization. And here also we deal with vulnerability assessment, so we really assess what vulnerabilities our organization has, and we deal with prioritizing vulnerabilities as well, which are more critical, which are more exploitable, which will make more sense. We seem to remediate, firstly, right? So yeah, we do that at the vulnerability assessment stage as well, and this is very critical in terms of your overall protection of the organization, right? So now we move on to our protect function, right? So for the protect function, this comprises of what we do, what we implement now to protect, because we identified, these things previously. So now what are we going to do to protect it, right? And we discuss things like cryptography. So cryptography, we discuss how are we going to protect our various forms of data, whether it's that data at rest, this is data maybe in the cloud, or maybe in a server somewhere, store data. We address how we're going to protect that, or data in transit, we're going over the network, right? So how are we going to protect data that will be transmitted over the network, right? And we could discuss here, data, encryption algorithms, whether we're using symmetric like DES or asymmetric such as RSA, and all of those different things would come into the conversation here at this stage, in terms of cryptography. Also, we'll be discussing MFA, so multi-factor authentication. And this basically here we're going to discuss what type of MFA systems we want to use in our organization, whether that be soft tokens, right? So many of you might be familiar with Google has its authenticator app, same thing with Microsoft and a bunch of other vendors out there. They have their own authenticator apps. These are soft token MFA options. Or you might prefer to go the hardware token route, right, where you actually have a YubiKey, right, and you're required to authenticate that way, right? So you might use a mixture, right? So yeah, here we discuss MFA, multi-factor authentication. Last but not least, we discuss here backup and recovery options. So how are we going to handle backup and recovery? Are we going to do on-prem backups? Do we have a dedicated disaster recovery location? Are we going to handle backups in the cloud? So all that we're going to discuss at this stage in terms of protection. And next we move on to the detect stage, right? And this detect stage, is very important, because this is the stage now, once we have all these safeguards in place, this is going to help us to be able to detect, if someone breaches these safeguards, right? If there's something nefarious happening, right? And at this stage now, we discuss monitoring and alerting tools. So things like EDR, endpoint detection and response. These sort of things this sort of tools live on our endpoint devices. So we're talking about laptops, desktop, mobile devices, maybe servers. Here's where we have the endpoint detection and response agents living. So they'll be able to notify us if something is breaching a policy, a security policy on our endpoint devices. Similarly, we have NDRs, or network detect and response systems. So these will be able to identify if things are breaching our defenses or our policies on our networking devices. These might be firewalls, routers, switches, access points, etc. It works kind of similar to the EDR, but we are dealing specifically with networking devices. Also, we discussed threat intelligence feeds. Right, so these threat intelligence feeds, these are a bit different because these gather feeds from external to the organization, so things that are trending. This deals with all the latest threats that may be affecting other organizations. It makes you aware of it, so you could some of them also analyzes these feeds against your internal organization as well. So this is also a pretty useful step because it helps what is going on right now inside the cybersecurity space. And as we know, this is always evolving, right? So it's good to have some sort of threat intelligence feed, keep you up to date, keep you on your toes of what's going on and what your organization might be susceptible to. And something like a SIEM, or Security Information and Event Management System, is something great to have. What this does, this basically takes all the data from our monitoring and alerting tools, and it aggregates that data, and it provides a centralized platform, a way to analyze and collect and store this data, right? So instead of you having to log in all these different tools, you would have probably heard that phrase, single pane of glass, right? And that's what a SIEM is. It's a single pane of glass, and it saves you the work of logging into all these various systems, and you could just log into a SIEM tool. A very popular one is Splunk, right? Or Microsoft Sentinel, right? There's a bunch of different SIEM tools out there, right? And they provide you that single pane of glass where you could analyze, collect, log data, instead of you having to go through all these different tools. Next up, we have the respond function. And what this deals with is, now we discuss incident management systems, right? So here we have, we already dealt with the previous function of alerting. Now that okay, yeah, we have this incident is taking place, this kind of builds on that, right? Here's where we have incident management systems. We analyze, we mitigate, we provide remediation for the things that were identified in the previous alerting stage, right? So yeah, respond incident management system. So just discussing that, this is a structured approach for identifying and responding to and resolving cybersecurity incidents, right? And this comprises of key personnel, right? We have incident responders, we have analysts, we have communication liaisons, right? So we have a bunch of different people that this team comprises of. We would have an incident commander, right? So it's actually a fully functioning kind of department in itself, right? Or a body of people in itself, right? That incident command system. So that way, once an incident happens, you're not scratching your head and you're just creating tickets, or you're ringing down someone's phone or emailing them. You have an established system. This is our incident response management system. Contact the incident response, the manager, right? The commander, in other words, and we go through those steps and how we're going to deal with this incident, right? We have our analysts, we have a comms person who would communicate our internal, external parties, etc. So incident management system, this is critical, to any cybersecurity team, right? Or your operations. And similar to the detect stage before, we have something here, as we had the same previously. Now we have something called a SOAR, right? So this is a security orchestration, automation, and response technology framework that integrates security tools and processes to automate and enhance incident response workflows. So I know that was a mouthful, right? But what that does is basically it automates these things, right? Similarly, how the SIEM would basically kind of aggregate and collect all these logs and interpret this data and stuff. That's what this SOAR does for this, right? It automates the incident. It helps with analyzing it, with mitigating it. It takes all the guesswork out of it, right? And this also provides workflows and playbooks and stuff like that, right? So there are a bunch of different popular SOARs out there in the market as well too. Splunk has one similarly to the SIEM tool that they have a SOAR tool. IBM also has one, and there's a bunch of different vendors. But a SOAR tool, it's not necessary, but it definitely is handy to help automate some of these tasks in the respond function. And here now, last but not least, we have the recover. We have the recover function. And here we discuss restore, how we're going to restore, things back to normal operations. Say we've been hit with an incident and we've remediated that. How are we going to restore now? Restore back things to normal, right? A normal working state, right? Whether we're restoring from offsite backups, whether we're using the cloud, whether we have a co-location that we replicate data to. We discuss all of that in our recovery function, right, under the restore stage. And after restoring, we need to verify, right? We need to verify that the data is working accordingly, because remember, chances are you may not have tested this data before, because let's say you did a backup today and tomorrow you hit with a cyber incident. Chances are you didn't get around to verifying that data. So now you need to verify the data, make sure it has verify the integrity of the data, the consistency, make sure it's up to date, it's relevant, and stuff like that. And last but not least, here we have communication, our comms, right? So here we discuss how we're going to communicate to our internal, our external parties, informing them of a cyber, if we had a cyber breach, do we need to inform law enforcement? Do we need to inform government agencies? Do we need to inform financial institutes, right? Each organization, and depending on what kind of data you deal with, you would have different communication plan accordingly to deal with that kind of data you're handling. But I know for most countries, you have a certain period of time, the US, UK, you have a certain period of time, you have, once an incident happens, you have to come forth and you have to let people know about it. You need to make a public statement. You can't sweep it under the rug. You need to communicate that to the public, right? So yeah, it will vary depending on your organization and the data you handle. So that's the recovery stage. And guys, that brings me to the end of this video, and I do apologize in advance. I'm just looking at my time, and I really didn't mean for this video to be so long, but there is a lot to go through in this framework, and I did try my best to summarize it for you. And as I said, I'm going to leave a link in the video description if you want to reference the full CSF 2.0 framework. As always, if you like this kind of content that I'm creating, I create cybersecurity content. Also, sometimes I do a bit of computer networking, system administration, and I try to release videos on a weekly basis. If this kind of thing interests you, why not consider subscribing to the channel and hitting on the notification bell so you'll be notified once a new video is released. As always, thanks again for viewing. See you soon.